Hello and welcome to the podcast on microtonal and Xen harmonic music, now in Xen. Our podcast guest today is Sevish. Maybe we could try and answer a few questions.
Oh wow.
And I'll bet we would have really different answers. But one cool question that I like that I've already maybe answered a little bit too much or talked about too much is what makes something Xen harmonic, I guess. People were talking about that in the group I want to say yesterday, because it often comes up. And it seems like everyone has their own version of what that means, myself included. So what do you think it means for you and your music, and does it matter for you?
Okay, yeah, the definition of Xen harmonic, because it depends on a subjective thing, that's why everyone has their own perspective on it, because it has to sound different to 12. So then the question is, what does 12 sound like to you?
Right.
So yeah, everyone's gonna, we can point to like 100 different tracks and ask the question, does it sound Xen harmonic? And a lot of them we'll probably agree on, and then some of them we might not.
Yeah.
I even wonder if there's stuff that's in 12 that might sound Xen harmonic. I'm not sure. Maybe some non-octave stuff, or I don't know. It might be possible.
Sometimes I think people can get Xen harmonic sounds through effects and not actually through like consciously using some sort of different like quantized tuning system.
Yeah, sure. Things like ring modulation can give you these weird Xen harmonic effects, because they totally break harmonic relationships, because it applies like a linear frequency kind of shift across the entire spectrum, so it totally breaks everything. I also wondered if that would be an interesting way of doing kind of that whole link between tuning and timbre, where you can have certain detuned tunings because you've got detuned timbres, or vice versa, and that the kind of match that happens there. I was wondering if you could start from a purely harmonic and just intonation place and use like ring modulation or amplitude modulation or something else to take that to a kind of bend the entire signal, but would it still maintain those relationships, because it's all, I don't know. I've gone way off topic. A minute ago you asked the question about what's Xen harmonic, and already I'm talking about something else. And the other question you had was, does it matter whether or not something is Xen harmonic? I mean, no. Unless you want to be Xen harmonic. If you want to be Xen harmonic and the stuff you're writing isn't, then obviously that's a problem for you. But should it be a problem for everyone? No. Just do what you like, man. It's music.
Right? Yeah, exactly. It's just it's that easy. I noticed something really interesting. The way that people categorize things as microtonal is like, it's really different if you're not a musician, because you might not know what you don't really know what intervals are. So it's a lot more difficult to understand the gradation of the thing or why it matters at all, because it's like, if we get an impression for music, then that impression sticks with us. And so if we just hear something and it all meshes together, but we're being told it's microtonal, then I don't know. There's a lot of people that don't assign that sort of difference to it. Like if something is too subtle and you don't notice it, then people don't categorize it as microtonal sounding. But then if something is more obviously microtonal and bad to people with little ears, then then that's where that is. So I wonder if there's some kind of like in-between zone where we can get people having all kinds of different opinions on it. I don't know. That fracturing, I think, is very interesting.
See, I like 22 Edo for that in-between zone, because it's kind of familiar and weird at the same time.
Yeah, I love it. It's kind of it's not like a 19 EDO exactly, but it does do that thing where, like, if I'm listening to it and I'm not actually listening to the intonation, it'll like sort of fly under the radar, But then if I really like focus in, I'm just like, whoa, that whole step's bigger than it's supposed to be, and that one's smaller than it's supposed to be. And it's like, it's very cool. It depends on like how much you want to look at it.
Yeah.
I just love that. I've been thinking I should use some JI tunings lately. Because a lot of people are
Really?
Yeah, just because I haven't explored it nearly as much as I want to, and it's becoming so popular that I feel like I should definitely like know it better. Because like I know like my basic intervals up through like 11 limit, and I don't know any like 13 limit intervals or anything. I want to be able to like read JI notation like I do notation in equal temperaments.
Right.
So I think it definitely starts with me like working with JI. And I've also heard that like creating your own scale in JI lately has been used in multiple places as like a pedagogical tool. Like you know, if you're like taking a little module on microtonality, like one thing you do is just like create your own JI scale basically.
That sounds like it would be really helpful. I remember when I started out with this whole microtonal stuff, creating my own JI scales is something I did fairly early on. I think once I'd seen a few, obviously heard a few, but your ears, you can't really get that much useful information about what it all means and what the intervals are. But once I'd seen, for example, I think one of the presets was Wendy Carlos Super Just, for example. It's a 12-note scale where they're all tuned to just, I think it might be 7 limit just or something. And that provides a reference that you can be like, oh, okay, so if this, what's that? This one, okay, that's a fifth. What's it called? 3/2. Huh, all right. You start to make those connections about what those ratios are and what, and translating that into a kind of musical language you can understand, like fifths or thirds, whatever it was you learned in school, I guess, or whatever you picked up. And then you can start to build them yourselves. Start to pick intervals you like the sound of. I think that's a great way to get your head around it.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And in talking to this stuff with a few people again, like in real life, it always just strikes me how much there is to learn and how difficult it is to really know all the information if you don't use it a lot, because like it's sort of a if you don't use it you lose it kind of thing. So it's like, you know, if you don't work with chords and harmony, you're gonna forget all the scales, and if you don't work with microtones, you'll forget all your JI intervals. And I have not worked with JI for so long that I am starting to forget some of the basic ones, so I have to go back and then get back to it. But
I always forget the sixths and sometimes the sevenths. I can't remember. Like, oh, should I be using like a 14/9, or should this be like an 8/5 or a 5/3? And I forget those ones for some reason. That range, that little area in the octave, I always forget. But I'm pretty good with the rest of it.
yeah. I tend to forget the ones that are like high numbers and stuff like that. But yeah, there's another question I wanted to ask you, by the way. I've been thinking about this a lot. Just how things have changed with microtonality, even over the last few years or so. How do you think the general attitude towards microtonality has changed, like on the internet, since you've been there? Because I know you've been doing this way longer than I have. So, like, just from going from point A to point B, well, how would you say things have shifted? I'm really interested to hear your thoughts.
I think it's quite similar. But when I first started, there was a massive bias, at least in the groups that I was in. There was a massive bias towards academic music. And every time someone would release something that was, for lack of a better phrase, pop music. Of course, I'm not describing pop music at all, but something that was, I guess something that's non-academic, that was always like a big event, like, oh, this is really interesting. But now we're spoiled because there's stuff happening all the time, but I'm really happy that it's turned out that way. There's still lots of academic stuff as well, so no matter what kind of entry point you're coming into this, there's still lots of stuff going on. And it just seems to continue growing like a wildfire. Every now and then someone catches a little spark, and they were like, oh, there's this microtonal thing, and then they spread it on. So it's still growing, I think.
Oh yeah. Oh, I love it when there's new people.
Yeah,
It's just so great because you kind of see it growing, and you're like, "This is amazing." It's got some real momentum.
and it's really promising that some of the new people become like big. Um, they become obsessed with it and make a name for themselves. You know, even people that kind of got into it a year ago are doing that. So that's fun. It's always changing.
Yeah, and the tools I think are definitely better. Like, how would you say that the tools for making microtonal music with synthesizers and things like that, how would you say those have improved since when you started?
Uh, yeah, so there's this whole massive change that's come about with MIDI 2.0. Actually, no, not specifically MIDI 2.0, although it will help, but the MIDI polyphonic expression, where now you can have individual notes be tuned. Whereas before, with MIDI, you would use your pitch bend wheel and all of the notes on that channel would all bend at the same time. So if you wanted to play, for example, a simple chord and alter one of those, for example, turn a major chord into a neutral chord by flattening that middle degree. You couldn't do that because as you tried to bend them down, all of them would bend at the same time, which kind of maintains that relationship between the pitches. MIDI polyphonic expression means that each individual note can be microtuned, which is really nice. So you could manually go in and add the things you want, but that's a lot of boring work. What's really promising is the various tools that are now coming out. Now that MIDI polyphonic expression is more widely available, there are tools that are coming out that kind of programmatically and automatically apply these pitch bends on a per note basis, so that all you've got to do is play notes on your keyboard, but this thing intercepts that MIDI data from your keyboard and applies the microtuning to the individual notes where appropriate to whatever scale you set it up as. And then it doesn't matter which synth you're using, as long as it supports MIDI polyphonic expression, it should just render that with the correct tuning. So that's like really exciting. So that's one way it's going. Then there's this whole other thing of the MTS ESP, which is a proprietary tuning method that came out. I think it was kicked off by Aphex Twin. Aphex Twin knew some audio developers. I don't know if I'm getting the story wrong, but they developed this thing under his guidance or whatever. I don't know the full story.
I might have to research the story. Yeah.
Yeah, I might need to research this. But for now, I'm just going to give you the hearsay, and people can find out. People can find out themselves what happened. And so this tuning software product has been released called MTS ESP Suite, which is like a comprehensive tuning tool. There's a free version as well that does less things. But it how have they done this? They've got in touch with a bunch of synth developers to have them add support for this thing. That it's just a plugin you run in your DAW, and you set the tuning in there, and then any other synths that support this MTS ESP standard should automatically be tuned up. So in the past, when I started, it would be a case of I create these tuning files, and if I've got 10 synth instruments, I have to load that into each one. And you can't change it, then the piece of music is stuck in that tuning. And if I wanted to pick a different tuning, I'd have to go into all 10 of those instruments and update them all, which is just a pain. But now you've got this thing where you load your tuning up into this one plugin, and the whole thing, all of your instruments that support it will automatically change their tuning. But not only that, but you can modulate your tuning. You can automate it, for example, to go between two different tunings. So I could have, I could have two different 7-note scales, for example, and have it gradually bend the entire tuning over the course of the piece, which is kind of crazy. It's the kind of stuff that I've wanted to do for a long time, but the technology didn't really allow me. There's another aspect to this which is quite interesting, but that part of it has been open sourced, and I believe it's so this MTS ESP suite, again, it's a something you buy from this company called
Odd Sound?
Odd Sound. I get confused because there's Odd Music, which is Jacob Barton was involved with this thing that happened years ago, but Odd Sound is the name, I think. And so they've open sourced something, and I think it allows people to develop their own master plugins for MTS ESP. So potentially they've given their competitors the key to the kingdom, in that someone else could develop a competing thing that uses the same tuning method. However, I think there's so many different potential ways that people might want to use this kind of software. And from what I've seen of MTS ESP Suite, it's very comprehensive. And it's like you go in and it's a world of numbers and weird things that would be perfect for someone like me who knows the lay of the land, that would be quite intimidating for others. And there's a potential there, I think, for other developers to create something that's maybe a bit more user-friendly, using the same library, would have the same compatibility, but would just be different approaches. Maybe something that's got nice little tuning pegs that you can drag the tuning pegs and you can listen to it and see how it sounds. So it's all moving and changing, and it's quite an exciting time to be involved in it.
Oh yeah, it's so exciting. I'm so happy to be part of the Odd Sound server. And
yeah, you need to send me an invite link. I've not got in there yet because it's not available for Linux yet, but I'm told that may be coming in the future. As soon as it does, I mean, it would be a day one purchase for me personally. I don't have any affiliation with these guys. I'm just like, I would definitely want to get this because there's things I want to try that it can allow me to do.
Yeah, I keep forgetting the Linux thing. I'm really glad you explained all that about the software, because I think for people like me, I get a little bit lost among the options. Although it certainly seems that like everything is getting better. I guess you could sort of say that when we're working with microtonal software now and improving everything, we're sort of in the process of discovering how we want our workflow to operate, as well as trying to get mainstream software to all support it and stuff like that. Because, like if you had asked me 6 years ago, about these kinds of softwares and what would be the most efficient, I probably wouldn't have thought of the idea that if you want to change the tuning with all the instruments, that it's just a pain in the neck. So it definitely takes a long time to know what kind of tuning flexible workflow everyone would want, not only based on what they already know, but what other people have done and what has worked for them. I guess each individual really kind of has their own workflow. For the dynamic tuning thing you mentioned, like what I did on the Emoji album with the Bull and Pierce music, I would start in Max MSP, and I used the transpose object, and I just went through the whole song and slid the knob around whenever I wanted it to go sharp and flat. So that was not automated.
The transpose object, I'm not familiar with that one. I've been diving back into Max MSP recently because when I was studying at university a few years ago, I got a student license for Max 6, which is really old now, but I had a lot of fun with it and I built some interesting stuff. And there's no way of authenticating my software now without reaching out to support because it's so old. But luckily someone helped me do that, so now I've got it set up again, with a manual activation. But yeah, it's fun working with that stuff. It's a totally different approach. And some people will find that approach works better for them because they have very specific needs. And it's just like you're saying, you have to find your own workflow when you're working with this stuff. And it's not that we couldn't find a tuning system that works for everyone. It's that the possibilities are literally so open and people have such different wants or needs from what they want to create that you can't create something that will appeal to everyone. You need to have these options there. Some people only want to work with small fixed sets. They might want to work with modal music or something like this. Then there are people that want all this dynamic, changing mathematical relations that's so complicated that they essentially just have to build their own system to handle all of that data. So, it's as much about finding your workflow as it is about finding your kind of voice, your musical voice. So.
Oh yeah. Microtonality definitely unlocks a a lot of individual potential. Like each person has such a different approach to it, and so you can kind of see someone's voice shining through a particular usage of a microtonal tuning, since there are so many different ways to use it. And with the transposer object, by the way, in Maximus P, it gives you a cent value, which is really nice. But then if you transpose it to 0 cents, it will click for some reason. So I just have the transposer object and I drag it up and down. But then if it bangs a 0, I just change it to randomly +1 cents or -1 cents, which I suppose will piss off like the 4 people who can hear that. But for everyone else, it's fine. But yeah, it's interesting because I don't know. I think maybe we're entering like a golden age of microtonality, where like most people on the internet are now aware of it, even if grudgingly, as musicians. The softwares are scrambling to actually get convenient, and we also have more online players that can do it in like an easy way. And you sort of did that, I think, first with Scale Workshop, and then we had Lima, and then there's also Xen Paper. I don't know if you played with that one, but it's really interesting to compare and contrast them, because Xen Paper definitely looks the most like code, but maybe it's the easiest to use since you just type in the notes and then they play. But I don't even know. I'm not sure if you can use the MIDI keyboard for that one. And Lima is obviously like super fancy. It might be overwhelming for some people, but for mathy people, I think it's like paradise, And Scale Workshop, I love Scale Workshop since it has all the frequencies there. Because my one of my high school students who's interested in this, he keeps trying to calculate all of the frequencies by hand, which is fun, but I think making music should be like something he should do more. So I keep just telling him to go to Scale Workshop and punch in his equal temperament, and then he could just see all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the other fun thing is all the browser-based tools now. You can see how it makes it more convenient because you don't have to install things. I mean, that's part of the reason why I did Scale Workshop, is because I was talking with people that were on the whole Mac ecosystem and they had trouble running Scala. And for those that don't know, Scala is software that you install on your computer for creating tunings, analyzing tunings, playing them, and then tuning other software instruments and hardware instruments via this one big thing. And it's less easy to install that on Mac than it is on the other platforms. So some people had trouble with that, and I thought, the web audio API is at a point now where you can actually hear these things in the browser. There's a way to programmatically set things so that it will play specific pitches. You don't have to rely on samples and stuff. So kind of all these ideas came together at the same time when I was doing Scale Workshop. Also the idea that you could encode the tuning in the URL so that people can copy and paste the URL, and then these tools start to spread virally because people are constantly pasting the URL. So I know Xen Paper does that as well. I think it's really good that it does that. Something like Xen Paper, I think, is a good tool for... It's probably the better tool for people who are talking about tunings and want to just quickly get an idea across of, there's this very specific chord, and then they can just input that into Xen Paper and send that, and then you just click a button, right? I haven't used it much, but you just click a button and you can hear that Xen Paper just plays it out for you. It's so cool.
Yeah. And you could also, with Xen Paper, I think you could get multiple tuning systems in easily. Like if you wanted to compare notes, like you could just type in like 1/12, like 1/12 of an octave, 16/15 semitone, 1/12, 16/15, like over and over if you wanted to just like compare like the 12 tet semitone and the 16/15 semitone. So things like that.
Yeah, that's really handy. So all of these tools coming out because the technology allows it. Again, it all helps to... It just helps people that are trying to get involved in this weird kind of aspect of music. And I think it's going to be like a positive feedback where when there's more tools, then more people can get involved. And then when there's more people involved, then there can be more tools. And then hopefully we can finally like liberate tuning from standardization. Because I don't think standardization should apply too much in music where it's a creative endeavor. mostly an expressive endeavor. We shouldn't be standardizing things. It's not like many things in this world that we standardize for good reason, because it helps us do things. For music, I don't know, it needs to be a bit more open. But we're going in that direction.
Absolutely. I was thinking of a really interesting question the other day. I'd love to know your answer. Because I'm not sure what my answer would be, but I have a few thoughts on it. It's like, we want microtonality to become more accepted. And of course, we've talked about, like, the idea of it becoming mainstream, if that could ever happen. I mean, it kind of already is in some ways, but I wonder, like, what it is we want eventually. Like, I think a few of my friends have, like, posed the question to me, like, okay, when would you be satisfied with not being a microtonal evangelist? Like, what would have to happen? Like, what would society have to be like?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't have any belief that microtonality will become mainstream.
Right.
Because the nature of it is quite technical. It requires understanding things that not everyone's going to know or care about. More importantly, not everyone's going to care about those details.
And people who don't care about those details label them esoteric, even though they're very useful.
Things are useful. For example, when you listen to a pop song, for example, that there was processing applied to the instruments, the vocals. There was compression, there were EQs. The best produced music, they're using these very specific compressors because they have this great quality, and they're using these filters because they cut in just the right way. And those things are important, but they're not important for the listener. And I think microtonality is one of those things. So it will get big amongst musicians who want to hone their craft, but not necessarily matter that much for listeners. Some listeners care. Some listeners are kind of nerdy and they want to know a bit more. They want more context. They want more understanding, even if they're not going to create their own microtonal music. I think some people, I think the King Giz fans are like a perfect example of that, because they care that there's something different about this music that I'm not getting from other. There are other bands with a similar sound, but there's this thing that they're not doing. It's the whole microtonal aspect. Just as an example, maybe not the best example. The narrative with the Giz stuff is, hey, they're breaking down the boundaries, but all the tracks are in Makam Bayati, so it's like it's not going that far.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Man, I mean, when I think about a society that's accepted microtonality as a general music making technique, which is different from sort of accepting it as a mainstream technique, I think of like any synthesizer would have to have it or be laughed out of the room. Like a synthesizer like not having reverb. I mean, there's some of those that don't have that, like maybe free ones and tiny ones, but like something like that where like just not having microtonality would be like, wait, you call yourself a synthesizer? Gotta be kidding me,
We might get there very soon, because things like MIDI polyphonic expression, if you want to call yourself a MIDI 2.0 synth, then you need to support MPE. And we're at the point now where we have the tools that, like I said, that automatically do all of the MPE stuff for you. So you just tell it what tuning you want, and then you could use any synth that's compatible with that. So we might get to that stage soon, and then you don't have to be an evangelist anymore. I'm not sure if I see myself as an evangelist for this stuff. I certainly like to. I'm not trying to reach some end goal of making microtonal big. I'm just trying to help musicians specifically do the stuff in whatever way I can by producing resources that can help them get into it. And I can still barely remember the time that I was getting into this stuff and how difficult it was to get an understanding of some things. I just had to kind of keep reading and keep listening until certain things started to click. And when one thing clicks, that kind of unlocks the door so that other things might click in the future. And after doing this for a long enough time, you just get an understanding of stuff. But not everyone can do that. Some people benefit from having a structured way of learning stuff so that they know they're getting the foundation and then they can go from there.
That I think would be another sign that we've gotten there, is that like the definitions of terms and things would be easy to find, and they would be discussed at a university more than as a passing footnote and or with disdain. Like the word Xen harmonic would be in the dictionary, and things like that, and no student would like get out of Western music school without knowing how to use at least one other tuning besides 12 tone equal temperament, or to like see music in another tuning besides 12 tone equal temperament and not be freaked out, stuff like that. So yeah, there's a lot of random little things I can think of where like people are just treating microtonality not like they should, and then like when they do, almost nothing might actually change really fundamentally. It's just that people have a better attitude towards this thing that everyone is trying to program them to not understand or to treat with vitriol. But
I think if there is an end game, it's not that microtonality becomes more mainstream. I think it's the idea of maybe non-traditional tunings, or maybe not even non-traditional, but just the idea that tunings are an expressive kind of parameter you can tweak to more finely get to your thing. It's not whether something is 12 or not. That's a perspective that's kind of it puts categories in people's mind of Western versus non-Western, where maybe that category is not very useful. I mean, you can think that way, but someone who's grown up in another culture, who has been immersed in a different tuning system that's considered standard to that culture, will have exactly the same revelation when discovering alternative tunings than us that were born into this whole 12 immersion. That process should be the same for anyone, no matter where you're from. And the important thing is learning that using different tunings is an expressive tool. That's what I think anyway. So that would be my end game. Microtonality and Xen harmonic are not in the dictionary because they come from a very specific perspective, from a Western perspective, and it's about something other than that, I think. But that's just the way I see it,
Yeah, you're right. No, I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's really interesting to think about what will happen to the definitions theoretically once society gets to a place where microtonality is part of everyday musical life, if that ever really happens. Maybe the definition of microtonal will actually change to mean containing small steps. And maybe the definition of Xen harmonic will change to mean highly non-standard sounding intervals, which is kind of vague, but you might be able to say that it could still have the same sort of comparative quality. One that I talked about in my Harnu presentation, where like if you have a given tuning system and you compare it against another one, how much does this other one line up with the standard one? And the standard one doesn't have to be 12-10 equal temperament, but it can be. So maybe we'll see like maybe a few standard tunings that kind of make it as mainstream, like maybe 5 or so. I don't know. It's hard to say. And what's also really weird is that the more finely divided an octave is, the less you can really say it has an individual character. So the idea of taking a finely chopped up standard tuning and analyzing it against a Xen harmonic tuning might not really hold up as well, because the translation would sound almost the same. So there's a lot that needs to be done to, I think, address that in my theory that I haven't really touched. So
but a lot of this stuff is only taking place in people's minds. It's not actually a state of the world. It's just ways that we're choosing to perceive and communicate about these ideas. If someone wants to use the word Xen harmonic to mean sounds different to the music that I was immersed in when in the place where I grew up, that would be totally reasonable for me. It's not the historical usage of that term. Obviously, it comes from Ivor Dareg, meaning sounds different from 12, but I would be perfectly happy with that. So, but it's not a big deal. But it's not a big deal. It's just I was just saying it's not a big deal that there's this kind of problem with the definitions of the words. But I think when we get into that, that's going to be the real enlightenment of the alternative tunings world, is going to be getting past the specific perspectives and to embrace the kind of the general perspective of, I don't know, in my mind it's traditional versus non-traditional, but it doesn't have to be that way. So I guess in my own mind I've still got some thinking to do.
Yo, I think you're right in that traditional versus non-traditional is certainly the way that many people approach this, and a non-traditional tuning definitely has like a vestige of like experimental nature, where like you come up with a designer tuning that's intentionally not like the tuning of whatever is around you. But if you have a tuning that doesn't sound like 12 tone equal temperament, that's just the traditional tuning you use. It's about like using the tools that are there and what's been done before versus saying, I'm going to intentionally do something different and branch off just because I can.
Yeah, it's quite interesting that.
Yeah, this is good stuff, man. So, what are your next album plans, things like that?
I am still doing music, not as much as I'd like. My day job keeps me from doing too much because it gets annoying spending a lot of time at the computer. So I work at a computer, and I do my music at the computer, so it's really difficult. I'm working on an EP because I have 4 tracks that are either done or they're kind of like, some of them are halfway done. But I know that I want to put these 4 out together as an EP. They have a similar tempo, they have similar kind of rhythm, and I think it'll work. I'm also working on an ambient project, which I've been doing for a while now, and that's going to be an album. So I'm just working on kind of mostly improvised, but not entirely. Mostly free time without a click. Yeah. I've really been enjoying it. it's a different way of composing for me, and I get to work with different kinds of tunings as well. I've been trying to work with, for that project, I've been trying to work with smaller tunings. Not always. I did a track in 22, but smaller tunings that are easy for me to improvise on, and a lot of modal stuff. Yeah, I love that. I love that whole feel of the kind of modal tunings where they have a very strong tonal pull to them, a tonal kind of center. I like tonal music. What can I say? And I can just jam, and then I can play it back, and I can tweak things and add things, and it's just kind of free and kind of cloud-like. So I'm having fun with that. I get to explore something different. So that's going to be an album. I don't know what people were going to think, because I'm not known for doing ambient stuff. What do you think? Am I known for that?
Not yet.
Not yet. Like in past albums, I've done tracks where it's just like an ambient track in the middle of an album that's just got a bunch of drums on it. So it's not totally unreasonable for me, but let's see how it goes. I'm looking forward to it.
I remember when you sent me that ambient jam that you did on SoundCloud, like in G or whatever, using like a just intonation scale, and I was just so floored and so excited. So I think people definitely want to see more of that from you, especially since you did it in, was it 7 EDO on Bubble? You had a really long one that was a cool improvised jam or whatever. That was kind of ambient.
Oh yeah, that was actually just intonation, like a tetrachordal scale. I can't describe the scale. I think it was some kind of maybe undertonal something or other, super particular, blah, 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 bunch of random buzzwords. Yeah, it was a just intonation scale. Again, very tonal, diatonic. Could you call it diatonic? I don't know. Tetrachordal, 7 notes.
Well, I don't know what were the actual notes, because if it can pass as like having like diatonic harmony, then maybe yes.
I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I'm not going to call it that, but I'm going to call it heptatonic.
Yeah, heptatonic is fine. Yeah, diatonic is weird. Because with melodic minor and harmonic minor, like I know in microtonality we just talk about it as if it's 5L2S, but then there's also just scales that are uneven, and then there's also the idea that you can use melodic minor and harmonic minor to be diatonic, even though those aren't the same scales. So the word diatonic is really difficult to know fully without understanding how it's worked.
Yeah, I'm sure I always misuse that, and probably half the other terms I misuse.
Same.
There's too much to know, and people were free to correct me or just totally disregard me, because the important thing's the music, right?
It's all about misusing the terminology. Yeah.
Yeah.
Lately microtonalists have figured out that they appear pedantic, and so have backed off on many instances of like people just completely butchering a term and then all of us getting mad. Because like usually if we were to get legitimately upset about that, it would be like something really, really damn easy to get right that they just didn't. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think that's gotten better too.
I think it will continue to be a problem, to be honest. I don't know, it's so easy to misunderstand things, and we get blinkered by being, I say we, I don't mean either of us personally, but can be blinkered by and have our heads too deeply in this whole thing, and that little mistakes that come out can appear much bigger than they are. It's not a big deal though. Sometimes it's funny. I like to see this kind of car crash social interactions happen. I don't know why. I think that's fascinating. And microtonality is definitely a place for that. Lots of awkward people. It's like me.
I love seeing that too. I think it's fun. As long as everybody's being nice.
As long as everyone's being nice, yeah, that's the thing.
I'd say everyone is nice, like, in microtonal groups, like, 95% of the time. Oh, by the way, I thought of something really cool. Your Sleep Deprived Cooked Alive, the intro would be perfect with saxes.
Really? Why is that? Because of the techniques used to produce 14 Edo or something else?
No, actually, just because I thought the synth sound would work with it. So actually, not nearly that technical. And
That could
I've
work.
been cheating with woodwind instruments and using Melodyne more than I have lately. But sometimes I try and get the intonation really dead on. I try and do that with the ocarina, but it's so hard to get the right
Mm.
notes. So
I would love to have more woodwind instruments to play with. I'd love to have an ocarina, bunch of instruments. I'd like to have one of those kind of overtone flute kind of things. That would be really nice. I'd love to have a didgeridoo. I'd love to have a shakuhachi.
yes,
So many cool woodwinds. I'm not much of a player, but I like to have little instruments around for jamming on and having fun with.
those are so fun. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'd love to have any of those instruments.
Something I do with my kalimba is I've got these tiny magnets, quite strong, what they called neodymium or something magnets,
Oh, for
and
amplification.
no, for retuning. So
Oh, you talked to me about this. That's right. You can actually retune the times
yeah,
using those without having to push them. That seems so weird. How would that even work?
I mean, first of all, they because they're magnetic, they stick onto the tines really well, and they add mass, and because they add mass, they lower the pitch. But also, the position of the magnets matter. So if they are closer to the end, closer to the free end of the tine, then they will have more of an effect on the pitch. They can also deaden the sustain, so there's a compromise to be made about how much mass you put on the tine, because you're reducing the sustain of your instrument. My kalimba, the sustain is really quite strong. That if I were to play fast things, it just sounds like a mushy chord. I know that not all are like that. I would probably say things like Mabira. How do you pronounce it? Is it Mabira or Mbira?
I've been saying Mabira.
I think maybe Mabira. I don't know. But things like that, I don't think the sustain is quite as strong. I think they're quite plinky. But my one, the sustain is very strong. But I think that gives me more flexibility with the tuning with these magnets because I can put them on. And recently I've been thinking about tuning my kalimba to a kind of master tuning that was quite sharp so that I would have more flexibility in flattening to get as what would be the perfect master tuning for the kalimba, as in actually the position of the tines, such that when I use magnets, I can get the most flexibility. There's an interesting question out there for someone with that kind of systematizing mind that can get their head around that. Because my mind doesn't work that way, but I think it's an interesting idea.
Oh yeah, I feel like there's definitely somebody who's going to be thinking about that question because you get people like in the Discord all the time being like, "What if I had a 41 tone playground? How would that work mathematically? Here's the entire schematic." And it's
Yeah,
like that kind of thing. I love those.
it's a good question for maybe a PhD student or something. Oh, maybe not. It's probably not big enough, not enough scope in that question. But
Too busy writing their dissertation.
yeah,
Oh, it's fun. Well, that is a really cool question to have about that kind of instrument.
I have a question for you actually. Speaking about the PhD stuff, do you get any students like writing to you? I know you're in a position of kind of authority, being that you run this podcast. Um, do you get people asking you for help because of being involved with microtonality?
Sometimes I don't. Occasionally, I get cold emails, and I love those because it means that I'm a real person. And you know, I like to respond to those with help and resources and stuff. And a lot of times I get like YouTube comments and sometimes comments on my website. So usually I help people out and direct them direct them where we need to go, or like if they're asking for an example of something, I try to point that out. So yeah, I try to be helpful in any way I can, and I definitely get people talking to me about it occasionally. Not as much lately, probably not as much in like the last I don't know, like 2 months, but in the spring I was getting a lot. So
It's just that kind of interesting topic where um, that kind of stuff happens.
right, and there's not that many people that are doing things with it. So it also means that like people are more likely to reach out since like they won't have anybody else in their lives who is also interested.
Yeah,
they they are forced to become like, you know, like get really internet savvy and email the right people and all that stuff.
yeah, and I also wonder if um, kind of academia of music theory and musicology and whatever, if they have caught up to what's actually happening on the ground, like in the on the Facebook groups and the Discord servers and the local meetups and the stuff that the whole microtonal scene is communicating on, and all these ideas that are going around, I wonder if they're like way behind because they have the overhead of having to produce papers and citing things, and we're just having this kind of frenzy of this exciting experimentation and discovery at the moment, and we're the place to be.
It's kind of like a catch-22, really, because if you don't have, you were talking about it earlier, getting people to use the tools so that the tools can be used by people, etc. It's almost kind of the same thing with any sort of academic literature. It's really, really difficult for any of that to break through, but there have been more theoretical papers written on the subject as more music has been written. I will say that I think there's a fairly large rift between people who always study the same old European stuff, and then there are people who acknowledge the validity of popular styles as well as dissonance and many other sorts of things. So I'd say that the establishment desperately wants to be stuck in the old way because it's easy to measure, but it's not at all current. So lots of people in the system who are actually working with new music and Xen harmonic music and cross-cultural music, they all get it, and they're trying to get the establishment to just teach things that matter occasionally, if not all the time. Because it's taught a certain way, more people know about it in that certain way, and so then it becomes more common. Like, how many people would know that a 5 resolves to 1 if they didn't teach it in school at all, and if there wasn't an understanding built around that? It's kind of like this thing that has that's co-evolved and feeds on itself, where the theory informs not only the method of creation but also the analysis. There's also lots of people who, after studying that, are eager to break out of that kind of analysis entirely. Like, I had this great friend who made a video, and he was talking about what he valued in music, and he said, like, notes are just like potatoes. They're okay, but, like, I don't care about them as much anymore. Because, he's interested in, like, the sound design and the timbre of the things he's doing.
Yeah.
But I'm definitely interested in microtonality because I still love analyzing things in terms of chord progressions and melodies. I just want new ones.
It's got plenty of that. Got all the chord progressions you could want.
You really never run out of them. Even when you thought you did, you go back to something that you, like, touched earlier and it's different than you thought it was. I wanted to get your feedback on any microtonal videos you think really need a transcription. Because I just thought of something. Obviously, your songs are amazing, so those would be ones that I would want to do. Paul Ehrlich's 22 EDO Shredfest Insanity. Brendan Burns' piece for 222 EDO guitars would be a really good one. You remember when Zatla and Benjamin had that collaboration called Xen Garden?
Mm-hmm.
That would be a killer transcription! That would be so fun to see in writing.
I'm really not sure what would be fun to see in writing because I'm kind of illiterate notationally. There have been times when I've needed to kind of read a score. I'm like, okay, look for that's where the C would be, and then I start counting up. And I'm a bit better with the treble clef, but when I've got to go down, it's like, oh, what's all this again?
Those are hard, yeah. That's really, really hard to do, yeah.
It's very rare that I need to do anything though because I don't perform. So it's less, and I don't have other people play my music, so it's less important for me. I've got out of that one, luckily. I don't know if I can call myself a real musician because I don't.
Oh yes, you can.
Nah.
The cult of the written score.
The cult of the written score. This whole thing is a sham. I'm not actually a musician. I just make electronic sounds with my computer.
You can't read music, so it actually doesn't count.
Yeah. And I'm not microtonal. I'm just out of tune.
Right, yeah. It's not even intentional. He's just hitting random notes. You know, I promise I knew this before I watched Adam Neely's Misty video, but Errol Gardner, he would be criticized for not being able to read music. He's a brilliant pianist, and his response was, no one pays to watch me read. Incredible. You never know what's going to look really cool. I guess the assumption is that anyone who's into quarter tone music is just not going to be using, like, diatonic scales. Except for, like, Jacob Collier, and he doesn't really count because he just, isn't thinking about how that's notated, and then other people just do that for him. So, you know.
Yeah, that's craziness. No, you were talking about teaching quarter tone stuff in school and then whether or not that would work. I don't know. Then I think there needs to be a reclaiming of tonality from the whole microtonal thing because sometimes it has gives people an impression that it's supposed to be crazy experimental atonal when actually the tonal stuff is really interesting and like almost anyone can appreciate it because it makes a kind of musical sense.
Yeah, I love that for microtonal music, and unfortunately, because of the silly vocabulary, I think there are some people that assume that music that doesn't use, like, the diatonic system doesn't count as tonal, or at least the gravity towards the pitch center isn't as strong. And I think that's a bunch of bull. We need to start using the word tonal for things that have a pitch center, because that's the technical division to make. So maybe we take tonal back, and then things get interesting.
Yeah.
Atonal is a really difficult word to kind of like pin down.
I mean, there's the whole thing about the combination product sets of Wilson's things that they can be used in a way that's atonal but consonant at the same time. I'm not sure if I've heard that in practice. It's not to say that that kind of music doesn't exist. And I think I understand the principle of how it should work, which is that all of the notes of the scale are related to some other note that's then removed from the scale. So you can never go to that note, but you're always floating around the edges.
That'd be really interesting.
I find those kind of scales really intimidating to get my head around because the problem I come across is the mapping on my instruments. You have to the way these scales are. It's kind of like a geometry. There's like a geometric relation between the different pitches, and the intervals are like edges of a 3D shape or a 4D or 5D shape, and that has to then get turned into this 1D piano layout, and it takes time to put little stickers on or to figure out, okay, these ones relate, just to figure out all the relations in advance. where I almost want an interface that looks the way the scale is oriented in, again, in this kind of space, this kind of geometry. I almost want like a geometric. Maybe VR would be good for that, like being able to actually reach out and touch.
That's like one of my dreams in life, is to have like a commercial with Paul Ehrlich's projective tuning space in it somehow, where like the person in the commercial like puts on these goggles, and all of a sudden the projective tuning space lines are like crisscrossing and dancing around them, and the music is playing, and they just like reach out and they like touch a generator and then like slide it along one of the lines in front of them, and you can hear the music detune as they do it. Oh, that'd be really.
That would be crazy. You know what it should also do? It should account for the space between your two ears, so that you've got a slightly different tuning in each ear.
Yes.
That'd probably be very disorienting. That wouldn't be very useful as a tool for teaching. For teaching, you would want to have the same thing in both ears, but I think it should have something slightly different in each ear, so that as you move your head through the space, you get this kind of weird thing.
That'd be great. There's a name for that. It's a phenomenon where you hear pitch perception a bit differently in one ear than the other, and a little bit of it is normal for everybody. But like, apparently this thing is just like more extreme, a little bit.
Yeah, I knew someone who had that, and he was like trying to become a mix engineer, and he, ever since he was young, he had this or he might have had an accident or something. One of his ears went totally weird. He's had to adapt to it over time. But the brain seems quite good at adapting to things,
Yeah.
There was that thing that, again, Mike Battaglia, hey, if you're listening, by the way, made a thread recently about some weird kind of sound thing that we could try. There was an experiment where people wore glasses that made the world appear upside down, and after a few days they get used to it. And what was the idea that Mike had about we should do something similar with ears? Is it like flipping the spectrum or something? I can't remember.
Something about making it like really inharmonic, so that we'd get
Yes.
used to inharmonic timbre.
Yeah.
Which I think sounds great. I really wish I could do that, but it would every time I go to work and listen to music, it's just, I wouldn't be able to do it.
I wouldn't be able to do it because I sleep on my side, and I think it would be very uncomfortable to be wearing those headphones while I was sleeping.
Oh yeah.
That's what I was thinking of.
Therapy. He might just have to do it like during the day. I don't know how this works.
For a while I've been thinking about trying to organise another kind of collaboration album between various people in the Xen space at the moment. And I'm not going to get time to do it, but I was thinking, wouldn't it be cool to have like a relay album where it starts off with first of all, everybody agrees in advance to choose a certain frequency as a tonal centre. And then, I don't know about 1 hertz, but I was thinking something within the audible range, and maybe G, key of G or something, and have everybody. It could be anything, it could be E half flat, and have everything start and end on that, and then after one person's written something, the next person has to write, but it has to overlap. They have to write on top of the previous one. And so you kind of get this going between different people's music. It would be really fun to do. Just having little ideas like that, but then it takes a lot of effort to organise these things. And I would love to. So if anyone's listening and wants to take that idea, please do. I'll even contribute if you want me to. Because we need to do that kind of stuff and let people pick their own tunings. So someone might do, okay, it's in G, but I'm going to use harmonic series, or someone else might be like, oh, it's in G, but I'm using 7E though. And it'd be cool to just have that G at the beginning and the end, so that they can all overlap in a cool way. Maybe even going as far as choosing the same tempo, although it doesn't necessarily have to be, because someone might want to do an ambient piece. I don't know. It'd be fun.
It's really funny that you mentioned that, because I think we kind of did that in the Xen EP in the server versus server competition, and there's also a part in like 18 tone equal temperament and 20 that I helped contribute toward that I swear used E half flat ish is the tonic.
Yeah,
it's a little bit different every time, because it wasn't tuned precisely, but that's part of the fun of it, I think. So.
So the thing with that EP, it's really cool what people can come up with when they're working together in a group. Yeah. And I had that label a few years ago. I mean, it's still kind of going. It's not really, but that split notes label, and I don't know if it gets kind of perceived as being my thing or my little baby, but I would love to have if not split notes, but then a similar project where it was kind of more community based, where people were contributing maybe collaboration albums and stuff. I don't know if it's worth trying to set that up, or if anyone's interested in joining in such a project, but maybe if a group of people were interested in doing all kinds of weird microtonal music, both experimental and just cool, listenable, funky stuff. I don't know, I think it would be really good to have that kind of project out there in the world. I can't spearhead it at the moment because I can barely keep up with my own stuff, and I think most other people are going to say the same thing.
Yeah, I think that's the issue you run into.
But all kinds of exciting stuff comes from people that had free time, and then we get people, working to the limit and barely able to afford stuff, and it's nasty. It's a nasty world, but
that's like such a good reason to give people free time, is to get all that creativity. Like, imagine how much more amazing music we would have if we paid people correctly. My God. Maybe that's actually what the boring people don't like. They don't, like, it's already, everything is too saturated, and there's already way too much music, so if we underpay people, then they won't make as much, and we won't have to deal with all this nonsense.
In a sense, they're not wrong, that we don't need any new musicians today. We've got so much stuff that's already been recorded that you could never listen to a fraction of it.
Yeah.
But
there's just so much, yeah.
That's not what it's about, though. I think music has to continue going on, even though we've got so much of it, because it's people doing people things. Music is like a people thing, as I see it. It's what people do. So you can't just stop it because we've already done music. It has to keep on going. There's no stop it. It's nature, essentially. It's our nature. It's the way we are.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, Sean, thanks for talking to me today.
Well, thanks. It's lovely being on again and having a chance to chat. I hope people find it an interesting conversation. And I'm interested to if anyone's got any thoughts on the stuff we said. I'll be watching out for the comments, I think, because I think there were a few open-ended questions in there that we've talked about today. It's a lot of work to do a podcast. There's so much work.
Yeah, doing it regularly is really difficult. Well, it's been great chatting. I definitely want to talk to you again sometime soon.
Oh, me and Benjamin are still working on a collab. We're working on a collab track at the moment. It's going quite well. Yeah, we get together on Discord and work on it for a couple of hours, which we did 2 weeks ago. Yeah, it's coming along. I'm going to listen to it now, actually, because I can't remember what it sounds like.
That is so cool. I would love to see how that workflow works. Just you guys just, like, coming up with cool ideas and just bouncing them off each other.
Cool. Should we wrap it up then?
All right, let's wrap it up. Thank you so much for listening to our latest episode of Now and Zen, featuring Sevish and myself. We have a bonus episode on arranging microtonal cover songs. I'm going to be going live on my YouTube channel and then turning that into an episode, since there's only one day left in June, and I wanted this all to be done by June. So again, thank you so much for listening. Now and Zen is a podcast with a YouTube channel, a Spotify place. It's on iTunes, it's on Stitcher, and I think Google Play maybe? So hopefully you can find that on the place where you get your podcasts. And we also have a Patreon account. And when the Patreon account gets to 60 patrons, I will continue making episodes regularly instead of sporadically. Thank you so much to all of our listeners and our patrons. I greatly enjoy making a podcast on microtonal and Xen harmonic music. A special thanks to our Xen harmonic gods, the high-tier patrons, Mike Battaglia, Sheldon Bird, Barry Lemon, Ari Cello, Adam Freese, Matthew Sheeran, Vincenzo Sicarella, Hector McGuffin, Christopher Bailey, Leland O. Weigel, Amy Coleman, Joe Weigel, and Tina Harmon-Carteau. And a big thanks to our Xen harmonic patrons as well. Catch you next time on Now and Zen.